Father David here. It's Sunday and time for your weekly sermon. And today's gospel lesson is that really tough one where Jesus says, if you want to follow me, you've got to hate your parents. And if you want to follow me, pick up your cross every day. And not only that, but give away all of your possessions. So today's sermon is entitled Possessing. So, what surprises does Jesus have for us today? As usual, he welcomes us with a doozy of a gospel lesson. And I'm pretty sure that any rational person listening to this lesson has got to be thinking to herself, what on earth is Jesus talking about? Does he really mean that for Mother's Day and Father's Day, we got to send a Hallmark card that says, I hate you, Mom. I hate you, Dad? You'd think that'd be enough outrage for one morning, but Jesus is just getting warmed up. He goes on to say that if you want to be my follower, you need to drag around an electric chair. Well, literally, he says you've got to drag around a cross, but the cross was just the ancient world's most horrific method of execution. Today, it's the electric chair. So, drag around an electric chair every day if you want to follow me, he insists. And then finally, he says something that is really difficult for 21st century ears to hear, and that is, if you want to follow me, you need to give up all your possessions. Now, we are 21st century consumers. We own a lot of stuff, and not only that, but truth be told, a lot of stuff also owns us. So how do we understand these verbal body blows from Jesus? Well, maybe it's best to start with the very last line of the gospel lesson, the one that says, you must give up all your possessions. Now, remember, when we're trying to understand Scripture, we have to understand its context, because the meaning of Scripture is not usually sitting there on the surface, the so-called literal meaning, which is why Scripture can stand the test of time, why it can bear the weight of thousands of years. That's because Scripture is immeasurably deep, always telling us to look deeper, closer, but also beyond, and to humbly recognize that when it comes to our faith, all of us are just beginners. And this allows us to be willing to let go of what I think is true so that God can guide me into God's depths. So what is the context in which Jesus says these words today? He's not talking to people living in a consumer society. There's not an AirPod or an iPad anywhere you can find one. The fact is, the folks Jesus is talking to didn't own much more than the clothes on their back, maybe some farming implements, maybe a pair of slippers for walking. So Jesus isn't talking so much about giving up stuff as about focusing on our attitude of possessing. Think about it. Because even if we 21st century characters decided to give away all of our stuff, well, what have we done? We've done something, and once we've done it, we won't have any more stuff. But here's the rub. Does the mere act of giving away our stuff change us on the inside? Does it change our insides, our thoughts, our values, how we relate to others? Probably not. But by slowly learning how to release the desire to possess, the compulsion to possess, that's when a spiritual, mental, and emotional change can happen. Now, keep in mind the need to possess, that is as instinctively human as the need to breathe. Isn't possessing the first thing we do when we're born? Think about a newborn infant. It can hardly see, it certainly can't explain anything, and yet one loud cry sends its mother's milk rushing through her breasts. This little infant possesses his grown-up mom. And as we grow older, we get better at possessing, which is often motivated by fear or envy or jealousy. And in that kind of possessing, relationships can be damaged. It's what St. Paul is getting at in his letter to Philemon this morning. Philemon's a slave owner, and Onesimus is his slave. And Paul is pleading with Philemon to give up possessing another human being, to see this person not as an object, but as a brother created in the image of the same God that Philemon is created in. And that's, I think, what Jesus is getting at when he's talking about our attitude toward our parents. Because the fact of the matter is, families can often be cesspools of possessing, of insecurity, of jealousy. I mean, where on earth do we get notions of racism or misogyny or nationalism if not sitting around the Thanksgiving table? Don't make an idol of your family or your tribe or your nation. That's what Jesus seems to be saying this morning. Possessing people, places, and things is about creating protection and security, but it is a false protection and a false security. It cannot stand the test of time, and it will not endure. And yet Jesus knows how deeply we are committed to possessing. And that's a situation that all of us are deeply tied up with. And this is what Moses is telling the Israelite people this morning when he puts before them God's choice of life or death, a blessing or a curse. Because Moses knows that the everyday foibles of everyday life always put before us a choice, that choice between life and death, blessing and curse. And when we choose to live life that is dominated by controlling others, we choose death. When we choose a life that's all about me, we choose a curse. But when we choose a life that is willing to let go, that allows God to be God, when we hold everything we think we know lightly and not tightly, then we give God a chance to pour out his grace, a grace that is determined to ensure that all shall be well. And it is at that moment that we can enter into the flow of joy. Moses knew how hard it was for people to transform this way. That's why his people wandered for 40 years in the desert. They had to kill off a whole generation before the others could develop eyes to see and ears to hear the grace that God wished to bestow upon them in the promised land. And maybe that's why Jesus chooses words today that are so tough to hear. He's like the farmer who smacks the mule in the forehead with a 2x4. The neighbor says, "Why'd you do that?" And the farmer says, "To get his attention." Today, Jesus is the farmer, and we are the mule. He invites us in no uncertain terms to practice giving up our need to possess and to let go of the attitude that I own you, no matter in what relationship that attitude arises. Because what happens when we give up the need to possess? When we do, at that very moment, we find ourselves possessed by the loving hands of this loving God, which is, ironically, the only possession that can truly set us free. God bless us all.